What if I told you that the smartest team on the grid didn't create the best innovation, but simply waited for the perfect moment to copy and improve it? Because that is exactly what the entire paddock is beginning to suspect, that McLaren has not only deciphered the hidden concept of Ferrari's blown exhaust, but could have taken it a step further, putting the FIA in check and unleashing a controversy that could completely change Formula One in 2026. It all begins in the place where true revolutions in Formula One are born, the details that no one sees, until it is too late. Because while most teams focus their attention on visible concepts, on spoilers, floors, and obvious configurations, Ferrari was silently working on something much deeper, something that was not only going to change its car, but the way in which rear aerodynamics is understood in this new regulatory era, developing a system that took advantage of exhaust gases to alter the airflow right at the most critical point of the car, an area where gaining a few thousandths can make the difference between dominating or disappearing. On the grille, what is striking is not only the innovation itself, but the level of integration that Ferrari achieved, because it was not an isolated piece or a one-off solution. It was a complete design philosophy that required redesigning the rear of the car, from the gearbox to the diffuser structure, adjusting each component to create a perfect synergy between engine performance and aerodynamic behavior, something that requires months of coordinated development between departments that normally work with different objectives, which explains why this concept completely passed unnoticed by the rest of the teams for so long. But this is where the real twist in the story comes in, because in Formula One nothing remains hidden forever, much less when we talk about a potentially decisive advantage. Since the moment Ferrari showed its card, even partially, it set off all the alarms within the paddock, forcing rival teams to analyze every centimeter of the red car, every image, every data, every behavior on the track, seeking to understand what was really happening in that rear area that seemed to defy the rules without breaking them. And among all these teams, there is one that has historically demonstrated a unique ability to interpret, adapt, and evolve foreign concepts. McLaren, a team that was already experiencing brutal growth in recent seasons, consolidating itself as a technical reference thanks to its aggressive approach to development, where practically every area of the car is susceptible to being reinvented if that means gaining performance, a mentality that they had already made clear with their constant evolution and their commitment to radical changes even when they were at the top. What no one expected is how quickly McLaren was going to react, because instead of taking months to understand Ferrari's concept, signs began to appear that they were working on something similar almost immediately, leading to growing suspicion within the paddock. This didn't seem like a simple copy, it seemed like a prepared response, as if McLaren had been closer to that idea than anyone imagined. This is where the tension escalates to another level, because the rival engineers begin to connect the dots and reach a disturbing conclusion. McLaren has not only understood the Ferrari concept, it has reinterpreted it under its own philosophy, which makes it even more dangerous. And this is key to understand, because copying in Formula One does not mean replicating exactly, it means adapting an idea to your own architecture, your own aerodynamic package, your own mechanical balance. And that is where McLaren has a brutal advantage, because its car was already designed under an extremely flexible approach, where each area could evolve without compromising the whole. What begins as a murmur in the paddock quickly transforms into an indirect accusation, comments between engineers, ambiguous statements in the media, uncomfortable silences on the part of Ferrari, because although no one says it openly, everyone understands what is happening. The biggest innovation of the season no longer belongs to a single team. And this has an immediate consequence. Ferrari loses its surprise factor, loses its strategic advantage, and is forced to react sooner than expected. But the most explosive thing is not that. The most explosive thing is the reaction of the FIA. Because when a single team finds a gray area in the regulations, the FIA can allow itself to observe, analyze, even tolerate, but when two teams begin to exploit that same area, the risk multiplies, because it is no longer an isolated advantage, it is a trend. And trends in Formula One are dangerous when they are not controlled, since they can escalate to levels that completely break the competitive balance. The FIA is then in an extremely delicate position, because any decision it makes will have enormous consequences. If it allows the development of this concept, it is giving the green light to a technological race that could force all teams to redesign their cars in the middle of the season, something expensive, risky, and potentially chaotic. But if he decides to intervene and limit it, he would not only be holding back Ferrari, but also McLaren, which could generate even greater controversy, especially if one of the two has already based a large part of their performance on that solution. Meanwhile, on the track, the effects are beginning to be visible, and this is where everything makes even more sense because McLaren's performance had already been dominant since its evolution in previous seasons, consolidating itself as one of the strongest teams both in race pace and aerodynamic management. But with this new interpretation of the concept, the leap could be even greater, especially in circuits where rear aerodynamic efficiency is decisive, which is beginning to generate real concern in Ferrari. They have opened the door to something that they cannot now close. And in the middle of all this, the rest of the grid watches and makes decisions. Because each team has to choose a path, invest resources in copying this trend or staying true to its own philosophy, a decision that is not trivial, because in modern Formula One time is the most valuable resource, and betting in the wrong direction can condemn an entire season. War is no longer silent, it is no longer technical. Now it is strategic, political, and completely open. And the most dangerous thing of all is that this is just beginning. And this is where everything explodes. Because when an innovation stops being an advantage and becomes a global threat, Formula One enters its most dangerous phase: intervention. We are no longer talking about interpretation or suspicions or even technical rivalry. We are talking about a breaking point where the FIA has to decide if it allows this war to continue, or if it stops it before it becomes something impossible to control. Ferrari knows this, and that is why their position changes completely, going from strategic silence to much more evident pressure within the paddock, because they understand that they have lost control of their own creation. What was once their secret weapon is now a concept that can be replicated, and worse still, can be improved by a team that has demonstrated a brutal ability to evolve existing ideas. And at this point, the problem is no longer McLaren. The problem is what comes next, because if they have achieved it, how long will it take for others to follow the same path? This is where the FIA enters the scene with the full weight of its authority, once again reviewing the concept from its foundation, questioning not only its literal legality, but its impact on the competitive balance, something that had already generated doubts from the first moment that Ferrari presented this solution under an extremely precise interpretation of the regulations. But now the situation is completely different because what was once an exception could become the norm, and that is something that Formula One has historically tried to avoid. The upcoming decision is brutal because there is no real middle ground. Either the development of this concept is allowed and a wild technological race is unleashed where all teams will have to adapt or be left behind, or it is directly limited, which would mean nipping the progress of Ferrari and McLaren in the bud, generating a direct conflict with two of the strongest teams of the moment. And either option has enormous sporting consequences. Meanwhile, on the track, the psychological effect is already doing its job because Ferrari is not only fighting against McLaren, it is fighting against the fact of knowing that their advantage is no longer unique, that every tenth they gained with months of development can now be equaled or even surpassed in less time by their direct rival, something that in modern Formula One is devastating on a competitive level. And McLaren plays in silence, because they understand perfectly what they have done. They don't need declarations, they don't need confirmations, the performance speaks for them. They have taken an idea, adapted it to their technical DNA, and now they are in a position to turn a copy into an evolution, and that is the most dangerous thing that can happen in this sport, because when an innovation changes hands and improves, the creator loses control of the narrative. The paddock is no longer wondering if this is legal or not, it is wondering who is going to dominate thanks to this. And at that moment, the controversy stops being the center of the story, and becomes the trigger for a new technical era in Formula One. Because if the FIA does not intervene, this does not stop here. This is just the beginning of a war that can completely redefine the 2026 championship. And in the end, it all comes down to an uncomfortable truth that defines modern Formula One. In this sport, he who invents does not win, he who evolves best wins. Ferrari opened a door that no one else had seen, interpreted the regulations with almost surgical precision and created a solution that could have marked an era, but the moment McLaren enters the game, that advantage ceases to be exclusive and becomes the start of a war that they can no longer control. Because what is really important about all this is not whether or not McLaren copied the concept, or even whether the FIA is going to allow it or limit it. What is truly decisive is that the balance has changed. Ferrari no longer competes against the rest of the grid from an advanced position. It now competes on equal terms or even at a disadvantage against a rival that has proven to be able to understand, adapt, and possibly improve its greatest innovation in record time. And this completely redefines the championship, because when two teams converge on the same technical idea, the differentiating factor stops being the concept and becomes the execution. Who develops it faster, who integrates it better, who exploits it in more circuits, who finds the next evolution first. And that's where the real battle begins. Meanwhile, the FIA has in its hands a decision that could change everything, because allowing this development could trigger a technological escalation that forces the entire grid to follow that path, but stopping it could artificially alter the competitive order. There is no easy decision, and any move will have profound consequences. But if the history of Formula One has taught us anything, it is that when an innovation like this arises, it never completely disappears. It can be limited, it can be redefined, it can even be banned, but it always leaves a seed that other teams will try to exploit in new ways. And so, what we are seeing here is not the end of a controversy, it is the birth of a new technical era, where Ferrari is no longer alone at the pinnacle of innovation, and where McLaren has shown that it does not need to create first. It just needs to understand better. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.